So let's talk about Minikube. Anyone here actually use Minikube? Had a play with it? You have. Still using it? A little bit. Okay. Be interesting to see how your experience compares then. So the whole point of Minikube is to give you a way to get experience with Kubernetes without needing everything I've just talked about on the diagrams before. It runs in a single virtual machine, so you can run it on something like that laptop I'm presenting on, in theory. Now to do that, what it's doing is it's scaling down Kubernetes. So if we go back to our diagram, first of all, we lose the cloud controllers. You're not running in a cloud environment, so they're not going to work. So there's no point in including those. As far as I can tell, you lose the sandbox as well. There may be a sandbox deployed as part of Minikube that I'm not aware of, but I can't find it, and I can't find it in the documentation. So as far as I know, it's not there. The other thing they do is they lose the concept of separate masters, and they lose the nodes as well. And so they run what's left inside a single VM, and that is powered by the boot to Docker ISO image. If anyone remembers the boot to Docker days. It's still there, we haven't killed it yet. It's like a vampire. No one's staked it successfully yet. But that's what Minikube is. It's a shrunk down version to fit inside one VM that hopefully will run on your own equipment. It's an official Kubernetes project. The best place to get started, I find, though, is the GitHub repo. The install instructions there are better to follow, I find, than anywhere else. So that all seems very straightforward until you get hands-on with Minikube, and that's when the fun begins. Because those things that are different, they matter. And there's some things that are missing, and they're a big deal. I've mentioned we lose those cloud controllers. There's no chance they're going to work on your local computer, so it's not possible for Minikube to ship them. It wouldn't make any sense. But the thing is, the things the cloud controllers do are things you will use all the time when you're using full-fat Kubernetes. Because most of us are taking software that's not written for Kubernetes. We're taking existing software and running it on Kubernetes. That's what I find anyway with my clients. So we lose those network load balancers because we've lost the cloud controllers, which means we've lost our network access into Kubernetes from the outside world, which is a big deal. Because if we go back to our diagram, suddenly now we've got a gap that's no longer bridged with Minikube. You can't reach the containers running on your pod without those load balancers. So there's a couple of things you can do about that. Have any of you heard of or tried Metal LB yet? Nope. So it is attempting to create pure software emulated load balancers. Last time I checked the website, which was Sunday, they didn't have instructions up there for how to get it working with Minikube. In fact, they had an apology that they had no instructions. And as far as I know, it's not shipped with Minikube at the moment. But if you Google around, there are blog posts from people saying, we've got it working, here's the hoops to jump through to get it working. So that's worth a look. But there's something else as well you can do instead. Any of you played with Ingress? Yep. How about yourself? No? Okay. We can actually put services inside Kubernetes and extend what Kubernetes can do. These controllers that I talked about earlier that run on the masters, you can also run controllers as part of your workload, and Ingress is one of those examples. We're going to come back and discuss the concept of controllers in a lot more detail later on. But an Ingress controller is an extension to Kubernetes. It works on both Minikube and it works on full-fat Kubernetes, which is really handy. But it doesn't give you full networking. It gives you HTTP and HTTPS support, but that's it. So for example, let's say you're running MySQL on your Kubernetes cluster, and you've got MySQL Workbench on your dev box, and you want to use MySQL Workbench to look at what's inside your database. It's a reasonable thing. I do that all the time in my development. Can't do that via Ingress. The Ingress spec is for HTTP and HTTPS only. There are ingress controllers that try to extend that spec to support other ports, but that stuff's starting to get non-portable and you start running into interesting fun with it. And if you're someone who's interested in HTTPS everywhere, ingress is effectively terminating HTTPS at the border, like we used to do in the old days. There's no HTTPS from ingress to your app. If you care about that, that's something to be aware of. So ingress is nice for Kubernetes, but in production, your organization may not want it. It's something to be aware of. Okay. Cloud controllers, I've mentioned before about the attached storage. And in my experience, attached storage is everywhere in the workloads that I run on Kubernetes. Because here's our Minikube, but we don't have those attached storage at all. So all of a sudden, our containers are back trying to write to their own file systems, which is a recipe for disaster. Have you come across host path storage? Nope. As far as I know, this is the best solution for emulating storage on Minikube. When you run your Docker containers locally, you're probably mounting folders off your host computer into your Docker containers when you run them. Yeah, you've done that using the volumes. Yeah, same idea. The thing is, Minikube runs inside a virtual machine. So you're actually mounting folders that are inside the virtual machine into the containers when you use host path. You're not using folders off your host computer. And that catches people out, because Minikube is a virtual machine. You're going to start and stop it. And when you do, all those folders disappear and they're lost. Minikube, one of the reasons I like using Minikube is it's got a command called Minikube delete. You can blat the whole thing and start from scratch if you screwed up while you're using it to develop for Kubernetes. Really handy. I think it's actually Minikube's most useful feature. But of course, that means all your data's gone completely. So that makes Minikube challenging in that respect. You can get folders from your host operating system into Minikube, but because it's running in a VM and the VM technologies are different from operating system to operating system, what you can do and how well it works varies from operating system to operating system. Now, the irony is I switched to Linux for all my development work because that's where you get the best Docker experience and the worst Minikube experience. The mounting volumes from on Linux is an absolute dog's breakfast. It's not Minikube's fault, it's just the technology isn't supported as well as VirtualBox does on other systems, sadly. The other thing is it's also not reliable. There's been at least one Minikube release where all this functionality was completely missing from the build. They forgot to build it in, and no one noticed until the tickets got opened on the bug tracker. So it's also something to be aware of with Minikube. In passing, we lose that sandbox. Now the sandbox's job is to sit between the container and everything the container's trying to do. So your container, if you're testing on Minikube without a sandbox, and then you put the container onto full-fat Kubernetes with a sandbox, there's a theoretical risk you'll see problems in prod you can't reproduce if you're using Minikube locally. I haven't seen it, but it's a theoretical risk, so just be aware of that. So it sounds like I'm really bashing on Minikube, doesn't it? And you might be sat there thinking, well, this is all a bit odd for an introduction to Minikube. But I do believe it's important that you know this up front. See, my interest in Minikube when I was first starting is I like representative dev environments. If I'm using Kubernetes for prod, I want to get as close to that as possible for dev. And the other thing about Kubernetes is it's really easy to deploy stuff once you've got your head around it, which means, in theory, I could give Minikube and some automation to devs who know nothing about deploying stuff, and I don't have to worry about it. They can get a dev environment up with minimal effort. When I was first reading about Minikube, it sounded great, so I dived in head first. And I've run into all these problems, and a few more we're going to go through. Because of these differences, you can't write the same set of deployment instructions to deploy things on both Minikube and full-fat Kubernetes, you end up maintaining two separate sets of install instructions. That can be a pain if you're installing a lot of systems. So it's something to be aware of. You can run your workloads, but you've got a lot of maintenance overhead to do so. So what's it like to live with Minikube? How have you found Minikube? Because you said you're still using it a bit.
It was quite challenging.
Quite challenging?
Yeah.
Okay.
Had some problems, and your comment on deleting was really useful. It fixed some things.
Yeah, it's brilliant, that, isn't it? It's not that Minikube's buggy and crashes. It's just that when you're learning Kubernetes, it's easy for you to screw up things. And the fact that Minikube has a built-in reset mechanism by being able to delete the VM and then it will spin up a blank Kubernetes from scratch with all your mistakes erased, it's a huge time saver. If you were doing that on a cluster on Amazon and you had to tear the whole cluster down and rebuild it, I mean, Minikube delete takes what, 5 minutes? If you had to tear a whole cluster down and rebuild it, even if it's fully automated, you're still talking 20, 30 minutes. So it's a huge time saver when you're doing development at Minikube deleters. And I wish I'd put a slide in about it because it's a great feature. But something else I found with Minikube, Kubernetes is meant to run on big systems. So scaling it down to fit in a VM, Kubernetes doesn't want to play nicely with that. And that's not Minikube's fault at all. The fact that they can take this big infrastructure and run it on a laptop is an amazing achievement. But Kubernetes itself wasn't designed for laptops. And as a result, it's a bit of a RAM hog, and it's, especially for someone like me who works largely untethered off battery-powered laptops, it's a bit of a CPU hog, and that's a big problem. And the amusing thing is, none of Minikube's code is the bloody problem. If you go from Docker back to VMs, VMs are slow and they have an overhead. They burn CPU and they're not doing anything. So that's part of the problem. And it has to be said, some of the Kubernetes components are not energy efficient and energy friendly. They will happily sit there and burn a CPU core before you've even deployed anything. They will just sit there and burn a CPU core even when idle. So it's a bit of a problem. When I was doing work with Docker, I was using a Lenovo X1 Carbon, an Ultrabook, and I could happily run a 7, 8 containers on that simultaneously with no problem at all. It wouldn't even run Minikube. I've had to replace that laptop ahead of schedule. And this isn't just my experience. I'm working with a customer at the minute who also wanted to use Minikube for their dev environments. And they've got a bunch of shiny MacBook Pros. But they're not fully spec'd out MacBook Pros. They're quite middle of the road. And Minikube won't run on those either nicely. And they're in a bit of a bind because they can't take the MacBook Pros back and exchange them. A MacBook Pro, you can't upgrade it. What you buy is what you've got till the day you get rid of it. So they're in a bit of a bind with that. I'm lucky, especially as I run my own company, I can just write stuff off and go, oh well. So I run a Lenovo T480 these days, which is very powerful and will run Minikube just fine. But how many of you have heard of Intel NUCs? NUC? Nope. You have. They're awesome. They're my secret weapon. They're what? They're about, take your mobile phone, imagine two of those laid side by side as make a square. They're about that size. You can stick them with 32 gig of RAM, fast flash storage, and the storage is faster than you'll get in most laptops, because most laptops may have even NVMe storage, but the storage isn't wired up very well. So you get full speed NVMe storage. And if you treat these as a box on the side, when you screw up, you can just black the whole box and restart. So I spend a lot of time writing automation stuff at the minute. And sometimes that automation goes wrong because I've made a mistake. And it's great if you've got a scratch machine, you can just wipe it, reinstall the operating system, and off you go. If I'd done that to my laptop, that's half a day lost putting my laptop back together from backups. So these things are awesome. And I've got like 5 of them and they just sit in a little row on my desk. I've got my own little test farm. It's brilliant. Intel NUCs. And they go in a backpack. I've actually taken them on site to do demos to clients and stuff. They're fantastic. Can't recommend them highly enough. So, I'm still using Minikube today despite everything I've said. I'm not here to do Minikube down. I want to make sure you go into it with your eyes open so you can make an informed choice about when to use Minikube and when not to use Minikube. Because this is experience that's taken several months to work through to get to the bottom of it. If you are writing, we'll explain what a Kubernetes object is later, but if you are writing deployment instructions to put stuff on Kubernetes, doing that with Minikube is faster. You can iterate through those faster, you can test them quicker, you can tear it down and rebuild from scratch far quicker. Saves a ton of time. So that is something Minikube is fantastic for, in my experience. Do you use it for that?
Yeah.
Do you find it helpful?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. As long as you sort out backups and stuff, you can actually use it to have Minikube as a little Kubernetes server at home. You can do that. When I get home tomorrow, I'm going to be moving my Jenkins into Minikube to do that sort of stuff. It's one thing I'm going to do. If you're doing development work though, you're writing software that's going to be deployed onto Kubernetes and you're not someone who actually does infrastructure at all, don't bother. Stick with something like Docker Compose. You'll be much quicker. Minikube will only get in the way and will only slow you down. So just don't bother. As an organization or a team, if for whatever reason Minikube's not an option and representative test environments are essential to the way you work, then spin a cluster up, one dev cluster up in the cloud and make all your devs share it. That's the best you can do with that. So that's Minikube. Any questions about Minikube before we go on? Nope. What do you think to Minikube? I've painted quite a black picture, haven't I?
It sounds like it takes quite a long time to set up.
It doesn't, to be honest, but it takes a long time for you to discover these things and realize that you've got to maintain the separate set of instructions and figure out what they should be.
Yeah, if you have to add like host path and the load balancers and everything.
Yeah, you've got to switch to ingress for that. And if you need something that doesn't do HTTP, you have to learn to live without it. Or you can cheat and actually have a reverse SSH tunnel to get at stuff as well. But those are the kind of tricks that are very bad and I shouldn't be teaching anybody. Not on camera anyway. It is handy at times though, especially if you're someone who's looking after Kubernetes and you want to get hands-on experience, or you're interested in Kubernetes but you don't want to spend the money to. One of the things, you've all heard of Kubernetes the hard way? Kelsey Hightower? No? So Kelsey Hightower maintains a set of instructions called Kubernetes the hard way, which shows you how to deploy Kubernetes yourself. No automated installers. It gives you every command to run in what sequence and how and what they all mean and why. It's a fantastic way to learn about deploying Kubernetes. And in the middle of all those notes, there's a comment saying that you cannot do this on a free tier for the cloud providers. You need too many resources to make it work. So if you're interested in Kubernetes, but you're not prepared to spend real money, Minikube's a good compromise as well.